Okay, so we should be recording. Hello to those who are watching the recording. I'm just trying to see where on my screen it says we're recording. Do we see that?
Mine says on the bottom.
It says it's recording. Okay, very good. So what we're going to do today, we want to finish the question of matriarchal patriarchal descent. And we'll see if we finish that. We may or may not go on to the next topic, which is going to be another question of Jewish status, Ethiopian Jews. And there were a number of statements made, not that long. I'm sure most of us remember the Great Airlift going back when most of the Ethiopian Jews were brought to Israel. It was a gradual process. They're almost all there now, as from my understanding, very few left. Okay, let's take a look at it again. Let's just review. Now, note we saw that the Reform movement issued a teshuvah in 1985, saying that Jewish descent is marked not by matriarchal, and even for that matter, not by patriarchal, but by positive steps of identification. Okay, in the popular mind, sometimes it's as if it's patriarchal is fully acceptable. Now, we looked last time at a teshuvah. I don't know, Carol, did you read all of Shai Cohn's article?
I did.
Did you get through it easily?
It was interesting. It was
Very dense and packed with information. Okay. So just to summarize from what we did last time, does Jewish traditional law favor matriarchal descent? And the answer is, of course, yes. And Shai Cohn went through a lot of reasons. We always know who the mother is. We don't always know who the father is. We sometimes, but of course, we have descent within the Jewish people. Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael goes through the father. And there's this argument about, well, the mother is closer to the child. And then Shai Cohn, we saw that points out that in ancient times, when a woman married when a Jewish woman had a child with a non-Jewish male, initially that child was considered a mamzer, which, as we've learned, is a very serious disability. And then rabbinic law changed that so that the child of a Jewish woman is a Jew, matriarchal descent. Happened in the rabbinic period, not sure why. So Shai Cohn tried to explain why, and his two suggestions were that first of all, to go back to the ancient period, when a woman married into a Jewish family, there was no such thing as conversion, and the assumption was that the woman became part of the husband's family. Okay, as in the case, as we know, of Moses, who married non-Jewish women, not to mention King Solomon, and we have many other examples. Okay, so how is it? So Shai Cohn had two theories. One, similar to rules in the ancient Roman Empire, where a child, in the marriage between two Romans, a child receives the status of the father. In an intermarriage between a Roman and a non-Roman, a child receives the citizen status of its mother. That was now established in Roman law. And he also said the possibility, and he didn't decide between them, was that there is some evidence based upon other Jewish legal issues about a mule whose mother is a horse and a donkey should be allowed to mate with other horses. This implies that horsehood is passed through the mother regardless of the father's species. This concept may have extrapolated by the rabbis to operate beyond the animal kingdom. Cohn presents both theories, but admits that neither have been conclusively proven. And let's be very clear, no theory has been conclusively proven about this. But again, the question sometimes is not only what is the origin, but what has been the accepted tradition over time. Okay, any question about that so far? Okay, so now what has the Rabbinical Assembly said about this? Good morning, Rini, how are you? Let's see, let me, oops, I have to, okay, share screen, and we're going to go over here. Okay, good. Okay, we're going to go over to, okay. This was when the Rabbinical Assembly. Again, we've seen this before. The Organization of Conservative Rabbis, and they have a Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. Note 1985, 1986, i.e., clearly this came about because the Reform movement at that time had talked about different approach to dissent. And also note that there's a difference between a ruling of the committee and a standard of Jewish practice. The committee has 25 members. According to the rules of the committee, any position that gains 6 votes is a valid position for the movement. A rabbi can decide to go by a minority view or a majority view if a position takes 6 votes. A standard has to have a much higher majority. So what happened in a 2-stage process to become a, quote, standard. Okay, first it was adopted at a meeting by a vote of 15-1. Pretty conclusive. Then they had a mail ballot just to be sure, because some people weren't at the meeting, and it went 25 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstention. Okay, and you can see voting in opposition to Seymour Siegel, one of my favorite, Zikron Olavracha, one of my favorite teachers at the seminary, very interesting Talmud teacher, and Philip Siegel. And abstaining was Rabbi Alan Guter, but everybody else voted in favor of it. Okay, 1985. Then the Rabbinical Assembly at its convention took a vote. And the vote was 235 to 92. I don't remember it had to be 2/3 or 3/4, but it clearly passed the threshold. So by a standard, that means that conservative rabbis, to be a member of the Rabbinical Assembly, must abide by it. If you break a standard, you can get thrown out of the Rabbinical Assembly. You can get thrown out of the Rabbinical Assembly by not paying your dues, like any reasonable organization. You can get thrown out of the Rabbinical Assembly for not following the placement rules, by going interviewing for a place that you have not been recommended for, or interviewing at a time when you are still under contract for, in certain ways, for a current congregation, or you can get thrown out of the Rabbinical Assembly for not following the standards of practice. This is a standard of practice. Okay, so here's what they said. Note what they say and how they say it. Whereas Jewishness is defined either through lineage or through conversion to Judaism, and whereas the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards has on several occasions reaffirmed its commitment to matriarchal descent, which has been authoritative in normative Judaism for many centuries as the sole determinant of Jewish lineage. Are they arguing reasons why? Do we see any reasons why here?
No.
Why?
Tradition.
Well, this is the way it's always been done, right? This is the traditional way. We go back to the time of the Talmud, and we go, well, we know from the time of the Talmud, early centuries of the Common Era, that this is it. Yes, in the Bible, we had some other things going on, but once the law was codified, that's the way it's been. Do they mention Shai Cohen and his teshuvah? Do they talk about anything else? No. Whereas the rulings of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which govern procedures for conversion supervised by Rabbinical Assembly members, require tevilah, that means immersion in a mikvah, for females, and tevilah, immersion in a mikvah, and brit milah in the case of males. And whereas the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards has long advocated members of the Rabbinical Assembly welcome and assist those who wish to approach Judaism in a serious fashion and to convert to Judaism in a manner which fulfills the requirements of conversion, including those steps outlined above. Therefore, the RA says, ascription of Jewish heritage through a legal instrument or ceremonial act on the basis of anything other than matrilineal descent, i.e., was saying matrilineal, and that if you convert, you have to convert with immersion in a mikvah, and if you're a male, brit milah, shall continue to be regarded as violations of the halacha. They shall henceforth be a violation of a standard of rabbinic practice and be inconsistent with membership in the RA, it being understood that any member of the RA shall continue to possess the right to petition the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards for an opinion on any case of extraordinary circumstances. So what do we have here? Clearly, it's not saying so, but clearly it is in reaction to what the reform movement said at that time, just to say to the RA, wait, you know, guys and girls, okay, at that time there were just a few, just about, that's actually just around the time that women were admitted to the RA 40 years ago. We are adhering to the traditional definition. Do they give any reasons why? Well, what's the basic reason? This has always been the way that it's been, and is also, underlying that is the concern about divisions within the Jewish people. Okay, comment or question about this? No. Okay, and then what has happened? We'll see. We'll share something else in a moment if I can get the right thing up here. Share screen. Okay, so then we have, oops. Remember, we've talked about this before when we talked about sexual abuse, that there is a code of professional conduct for the RA, and that just came out last year. Okay. And it says that a member of the RA is expected that the rulings of the RA and the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards will serve as guidance. Standards of religious practice are binding upon all members of the RA. There aren't a lot of standards, I think about 3. Such standards are established through the Committee on Jewish Law with the approval of the RA, etc. So here it is. Jewish status and conversion. Clergy of the conservative Masorti movement may grant formal Jewish status only to a person who is either born to a Jewish woman or converted with tevilah, immersions in a mikvah, and if male, brit milah as approved by a bet din. Any member of the RA shall continue to possess the right to petition. Okay, all right. So here it is caught up there in 1985. It was passed by the committee and the RA, and now in 2024, it is now in the Code of Professional Conduct. Think they did the right thing?
Yeah.
Comments, questions? Brian, you think they did the right thing?
Sure.
Okay. Anyone else comment or question on that? Yeah. Yes, please, Roy, go ahead.
What does the Torah say about it?
Well, that's a great question. And the Torah is not, well, just when you say Torah, we're talking about the 5 books, or we're talking about the whole Tanakh. Even though, let's go through the whole Tanakh, right? All the books of the Bible. All the books of the Bible, as seem to imply the following. If a non-Jewish woman marries a Jewish man, the assumption is that that non-Jewish woman gives up the connections she has to her family of birth and becomes a part of that Jewish man's family, right? Remember, we're talking at a time conversion does not exist. We're talking about ancient times. We're not talking about open American society where you can do or believe or anything you want. You're a person, you're part of a community. There aren't, quote, free agents, people with no running around all the time. You're in ancient times, you're a Midianite, or you're a Jew, you're a Jebusite, etc. So if a woman married a Jewish man and she was not Jewish, the assumption is that she became part of his clan, and the children of that woman are part of that clan. Now, is that patriarchal? In a sense it is, but in a sense it isn't, because it's both patriarchal and based on the assumption that the woman is leaving the clan, of her birth and joining the Jewish clan. Story of Ruth, right? So the Torah does not have a particular rule in it. This is how Jewish identity is passed on, but we have those examples. We have the examples of Moses. Who was Moses' wife? daughter of a Midianite priest.
So
Right.
Okay. The assumption being that once she left her father, Yitro, she became part of the quote clan of Moses, and her children were Jews. What we have in the modern world, of course, is a totally different world, right? People are not identified by the clan or group that they belong to. They can be free agents. They can belong to no clan. We talk about individual choice. So yes, in the time of the Torah, time of the Bible, and early Talmudic period, there was no explicit rule until later on in the Talmud, i.e., early centuries of the Common Era. Okay, and then Shai Cohn tries to understand why, and he has his two theories. Well, Roman law worked that way, or Jewish law worked that way when it talked about certain types of mixtures. Okay, any other comments or questions about this? I will point out there are a few, not a lot, there are a few conservative rabbis who have been questioning this. And I would point out that this is the vast majority of conservative rabbis support matriarchal descent and would argue, well, conversion is always possible. Now, does it make us, quote, less welcoming to patriarchal Jews? Yeah. So the question is, how do we maintain both a traditional view about Jewish descent and create a welcoming ambiance? Not an easy matter. Yes, Rini.
Well, excuse me, we also don't just accept someone who walks in the door and says, I want to be Jewish, and we convert them. We make sure they're serious and they study and so on. It's
Right.
a whole process. So you could say that's not welcoming too, but I think the idea is, are they serious? And so, if a woman is serious, then she'll go through this.
Yeah, right. And then that's the thing I pointed out. Now we have the cases, and I've had these cases. People grow up their whole lives. They're patriarchal. They say they're Jews. They've lived, that's been their identity. So if they come to us and want to get married, we do have to say you have to go through a conversion. But in my experience, and I suspect in my other colleagues as well, that does not involve a year-long study. And some of the other things that we do for people who are having, we make it pretty easy, shall we say, for that to happen. And frankly, I've spoken to people about this, and I was happy to see that people said, okay. Just as well, people could say, "What? Who the heck are you? I'm a Jew, and you don't think I am? Goodbye." That has never happened to me, but it is certainly something that I suspect has happened to some of my colleagues. But that's where we are. Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions about this? Then, of course, we also have now. We have rabbis in the Reform movement who are patriarchal, right? So how do you do with a colleague, a Reform rabbi, whose father was Jewish but mother was not? You accept them as a rabbi. That's what you do. I mean, well, what are you going to do? Yeah, Carol?
does the state of Israel accept a patriarchal Jew?
Now, the state of Israel, it's a little more complicated, of course. State of Israel had that famous Brother Daniel case in the 1950s, where some of you may recall, where a Holocaust survivor became a priest. His name was Daniel, and he wanted to go on to Israel on the law of return.
Israel didn't accept him.
That is correct.
Right.
Israel said that if you formally convert to another religion, you are no longer a Jew, which is, of course, puts a lie to all of these messianics out there, But the question in the state of Israel has arisen. In the state of Israel, remember, personal status is in the hands of the rabbinic courts in Israel. So the rabbinic courts in Israel will accept matriarchal. So if you're a patriarchal Jew and you wanted to make Aliyah, you could make Aliyah. But what if you want to get married? Then you got problems, right? Because then you have to deal with the personal status issues within the rabbinic courts. A lot of problems with that, questions with that with Jews from the former Soviet Union. Many of whom were patriarchal Jews. They were accepted for Aliyah, and there were some issues. What if they joined the IDF, died in battle? Can they be buried in a Jewish cemetery? That became an issue in Israel among the strict Orthodox who were trying to deny that, and that became a serious issue. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we move on to our next topic? Okay, so let's ask a simple question. Are Ethiopian Jews really Jews? And how do we know that?
Because they said they're Jews.
They say they're Jews. Well, anybody could say they're a Jew, you know.
Why would you say you're Jewish? Why would you say you're Jewish if you're not? It's so much harder to be Jewish in this world than not Jewish.
Well, you know, somewhere back in the past, somebody said they were Jewish, but they really weren't. And all of a sudden, now you have a group of people who aren't really, so we're not so sure if they're Jews or not. You know what? There are African Americans in the United States in the 1920s. It was a great period. You know, we talk about the Roaring 20s, but it was also a great period. Lots of social things were going on. The Ku Klux Klan out of Indianapolis, Indiana, of all places, was very well organized. There was a lot of religious ferment, and there were a group of African Americans who said, you know, we're the real Jews, and they formed congregations. They studied Hebrew. They observed Kashrut and Shabbat, and go to Chicago and New York. You have large groups. Well, large, I don't know what large means, but you do have groups like that. But how do you know the Ethiopian Jews are really Jews? How would you know that? Self-definition, okay. You could say, gee, why would someone say that? You know, they were discriminated against in Ethiopia, which is why they wanted to get out. But they did not have the Judaism of the Talmud. They had the Judaism of the Bible, but somehow they got separated off at some point. And there's a lot of stuff that they did a little differently than we do. So when there was that major push to have them come to Israel, I don't remember when it was, late 1980s, mid 80s, yeah, early 1980s. It was before 1985. I don't remember the exact year. I know it was before I left East Windsor and I went to Nashville. Before I got to Nashville, there was a major aliyah from Ethiopia. You remember the pictures? They're sitting in the planes, and some of them had never seen an elevator or a staircase before, and they had little numbers around their necks. They weren't sure who's who and what's what, and they were airlifted to Israel. So how do we know the Jews? And that became a question, of course, in Israel, because again, who determines personal status issues? We have an Orthodox rabbinate. So one of the most important documents of that time, which we're going to look at, no, not this one yet, not yet. Oh, here we are. This one. Okay. So the question, what is the status of Ethiopian Jews? Are they really Jews or not? So one of the most significant statements about this was made here by Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and we have a text of what he said on the status of Ethiopian Jews. It's based upon, this is just a reference. Okay. Now, Ovadia Yosef was a fascinating individual, right? He was born in Baghdad. Remember, in Baghdad, prior to 1940, of all the different religious groups in Baghdad, the largest single religious group in Baghdad were Jews. There were Jews, there were Shiites, there were Sunnis, there were Christians. The largest of those were Jews. The Baghdadi Jewish community went back to the Babylonian exile, went back 2,000 years, well-established community. Okay, so he was born in Baghdad. He immigrated to Palestine. Although his father wanted to run a grocery store, the yeshiva said he was a really great student. So he served as the deputy chief rabbi in Cairo until 1950. And then the Supreme Rabbinical Court of Appeals, Sephardic chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and elected as Rishon LeZion, Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel for 2 terms. Okay, Israel has a Sephardic chief rabbi and an Ashkenazi chief rabbi. They have large numbers of, and the Sephardim also include the Mizrahi. It's a little more confusing. It's not just the people who came out of Spain, but the people who came out of Iran, Iraq, places where they were never in Spain. But, you know, they are mislabeled Sephardim, even though we should properly call them Mizrahim. Think of the late Ephraim Levi, right? He was born in Iraq. Okay. So here we have this very prominent rabbi. He adamantly asserted Sephardic Mizrahi identified, right? Remember, early Israel, where did the founders come from? Europe.
Mhm.
Who were the founding rabbis? Ashkenazim, right?
Right.
What was the founding culture? Socialism, right? So that has, and then all of a sudden, you have this huge immigration of like 600,000-700,000 Jews from North Africa, Iran, Iraq, and the whole Mediterranean basin. And they are now a significant number of Jews in Israel. And for a long time, they were facing discrimination. They weren't taken as seriously as Ashkenazim. Yes, there was a bit of racism and a bit of cultural superiority that a lot of the Ashkenazi felt to the Sephardim, right? An Ashkenazi marry a Sephardi, gee, 1950, that wouldn't happen. Nowadays, it's a whole totally different. But there was a lot of discrimination. So he wanted to assert the Sephardi Mizrahi identity, seeking to restore the crown of Sephardic Jews to its former glory. He insisted upon Sephardi Mizrahi practice amid Ashkenazic religious hegemony, right? We're not just doing things the way the Ashkenazim do. He tried to unify the halacha of Mizrahi Sephardi communities, upholding the opinions of Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Sephardic author of Shulchan Aruch. There was a political party that to this day is a significant factor in Israeli elections. Shas has been in almost all the coalitions to address the prejudice, political, and cultural marginalization. Okay, he straddled the ultra-Orthodox and modern Orthodox. You know, by inclination, he was ultra-Orthodox in the way he lived and the rulings generally issued. But as an employee of the official state rabbinate, he supported the institutions of the state. You know, today there are some ultra-Orthodox people who don't even recognize the state of Israel, right? He did rule leniently in a number of significant cases to prevent women from becoming agunot because their husbands had not issued them a get. He was a writer. His funeral 12 years ago, attended by at least 800,000 people. Shows you how, you know, significant he was. So here's the question: Are these Ethiopian Jews? You know, they started to come in the 50s and the 60s, but of course in the 80s it was really a large number. They're almost all there now. Anyone who's been to Israel, you see Ethiopian Jews. They're all over Israel, right? It's not surprising to see a group of soldiers march by. You know, soldiers march by all the time in Israel, and you see some of them are obviously from Ethiopia. Some of them are Sephardim, Mizrahim, Ashkenazim. It's very mixed, always a mixed group. Okay, so here's the question: how do we know for sure that they are Jews? Now, note they were flown into Israel, right? They got into the army. You know, there's some still serious questions as to whether they're being totally treated equally, educationally, but they came to Israel. Okay. Based his own views on the early rabbinate, he asserts that Ethiopian Jews are descendants of the tribe of Dan, a tribe from biblical times that would remain unaware of later rabbinic interpretations of our tradition. So what's the theory here? 12 tribes. One of the tribes wound up in Ethiopia and lost track of the rest of the Jewish world. He defends the early rabbinic decisors. He cites Ashkenazic chief Rabbi Isaac Herzog, okay, who cast, he cites against Rabbi Herzog, who cast doubts. Okay, so here's what he has to say. Regarding the immigrants from Ethiopia, the Falasha, we don't like to use the word Falasha, but the Ethiopian Jews of Beta Yisrael. He's quoting someone from the 15th and 16th century, wrote that the Ethiopians who came to Ethiopia are from the tribe of Dan is known without any doubt. Let's stop for a second. When is this being written? 15th, 16th century. Obviously, the person who was writing this has a long tradition. They did not have in their past sages who were aware of the rabbinic tradition. They didn't know the Talmud. They understood only the superficial meaning of the scripture. But if they had been teaching them rabbinic tradition, they would not be heretics like the Karaites, right? There was a group in the Middle Ages who said, we're going to follow Judaism just as it's written in the Bible, and we don't have to follow the Talmud. There's still a few around, not very many. There's a great deal of polemics in the Middle Ages, and they are mostly gone. Okay, therefore, their religious status is like an infant who was taken in captivity among non-Jews and knows nothing of Judaism, for whom it is a mitzvah to redeem them and sustain them. Following him was his great student, Rabbi Jacob Castro. Okay, I've also expressed my opinion. Okay, Falashas are Jews in every regard. I saw this in a response of the Gaon, the Rishon Litzion, Rabbi Raphael Meir Panagel. Okay, now who would come after these two mighty kings, these other authorities, to place doubt upon these Jews and not fear to be singled by the glowing coals of the rabbis and the Rabbi Castro, since their words are like fiery coals and are established by the Lord of truth and justice. What is his basis for believing this? There were rabbis in the 15th and 16th century who became aware of these Jews in Ethiopia and said they're fully Jews, like for the tribe of Dan. Okay, now, when I served as chief rabbi of Israel, I replied to my questioners about the matter of the Falashas, relying on the authorities, that the Falashas are without doubt from the tribe of Dan. I also found a number of other Geonim, great rabbinic authorities, from the generation before us who agreed, including Rabbi Azriel Hildesheimer. Hildesheimer was the rabbi of the main modern Orthodox yeshiva in Berlin. Very important name, Hildesheimer. Therefore, I came to my conclusion that the Falashas were members of a tribe of Israel who were driven southward to Ethiopia. And notice how strongly he says this, without any doubt. The Geonim mentioned above, who reached this conclusion, did so through assiduous research, through very reliable testimonies and proofs, as well as through rabbinic tradition. Not only did these guys have these tradition, all these guys are from Dan, but he's claiming that they found very reliable testimonies. After the leaders of Falasha turned to me requesting to join with our brothers, okay, without any reservation, I thought to myself, it is not a time to be silent. We must save them from assimilation, bring them quickly to the land of Israel to educate them in the spirit of our sacred Torah, join with them in the rebuilding of a sacred land. Okay. In light of this, I turned to the government, to all organizations, to do everything to bring them to the land of Israel in order to educate them in religious schools so that none of them will go astray. This ruling paved the way for the recognition of the Falasha community as Jews according to the law of return. So he was very influential in proving this. In a meeting in 1975, an agreement was reached establishing to investigate. Okay, they decided to apply the law of return upon them, right? Chok HaShavut, that's the law of return. Any Jew can go to Israel. acknowledging is this is based upon the opinion of the Rishon LeZion Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. So his testimony was critical in saying that the Falashas are Jews. However, I shall not hide that I saw a respondum of the Ashkenazi chief rabbi Isaac Herzog, who wrote about doubts regarding the Jewishness of the Falashas because he saw that rigorous academic researchers have concluded that the Falashas were of non-Jewish descent that had sometime converted, and if so, it is clear that they converted not on the condition that they observe our Judaism based on the oral law, but on Judaism they invented from their own hearts. So now someone else is saying, an Ashkenazi rabbi, they're not really Jews. Okay, so he goes on. Their religious status is like one who converted on the condition to observe all the Torah except for one matter ascribed to the sages. Okay. And if so, perhaps they are not Jews. I was shocked and very surprised to see that Rabbi Herzog rejected the words of the great authorities who determined with certainty, that the Ethiopian Jews are Jews according to Halakha, understanding in place of academic researchers who have cast doubts on their Jewishness. So who is he weighing? Who is he weighing on the two sides of this question? Right? He has on the one hand the traditional Jewish commentators from the 15th and 16th century who say they're Jews. And now he's saying these, what does he call them? Academic researchers, scholars, historians, who say, well, maybe they aren't Jews. But he concludes they are. Okay, that's where he's coming to. Rini, you have a question. I have some questions as well.
I just had to unmute. Not
Okay,
a
go ahead.
question, but in our congregation, we have 2 Ugandan Jews. There's quite a thriving community of Jews in Uganda. And who's to say they're not, they actually fit right in to our congregation and read Hebrew and all that stuff.
Yeah.
They were counselors at Ramah for a
Right.
while, and they happen to be political asylum seekers, but they told us there's a thriving community of Jews in
Yes.
Uganda. So who's to say
Right.
they're not Jews?
Well, actually, there was formal conversion for members of that community. One of my actually classmates, Rabbi,
Oh yeah.
What's his name? Jerry, I can't remember Jerry's last name. One of my classmates and some other conservative rabbis went to Uganda. And they actually did conversions for that community. So there's no question about, I'm not familiar with the origins of that community, but I do know that there have been formal conversions for members of that community, and certainly recognize them within the conservative movement. That there's a name, and I can't remember the name for that community that they are.
I don't know it either.
It begins with an A, and I just don't remember offhand off my head. But the Falashas, the Ethiopian Jews, we have Rabbi Ovadia Yosef saying, no question they're Jews. Why? Because we have scholars from the 15th and 16th century who said so, and they are so reliable, and they must have done the investigations, and all of you academics who say that they're not, well, how can you doubt these great scholars? I think there might be something else going on. Maybe I'm pushing it. Any other comments on this? Why Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is so determined here? Okay, well then let's take a look at something else. All right. So now, how are they Jews or are they not Jews? The next text, we'll take a look at. Okay, the Reform movement. What did the Reform movement say about them?
He accepted them.
Okay, let's see if I can find it easily. This one, no, not this one. No, not that one either. Oh, I know where it is. Okay. 1 second. I'm again having a little Trouble with the screen sharing. There it is. Got it. Okay. So what does the reform movement say? 1985, when they did patriarchal, it was also around the time, as I said, just before 1985, there was a large immigration of Ethiopian Jews. What do you think the reform movement is going to say?
Yeah, they're Jews.
Why would they do that?
Maybe because the reform movement has a bigger tent.
Okay. And do you think Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, as a Sephardic rabbi, who has a sense of the marginalization of Sephardic Jews, might have a greater desire to take this other marginalized group and put them under the tent of Judaism? I'm speculating here, but it's possible, right? Okay. So what is reform movement? Okay, our reform movement has been in the forefront of North American Jewish community, mobilizing efforts through relief. We have witnessed the returns of a large portion of the Ethiopian Jewish community. Okay, and therefore they say, by the way, our Ethiopian brethren, their need to establish an Israel with dignity, that need makes a special claim upon Reform Judaism's central concern for social justice. They want to continue support. They want to have programs. Condemns the efforts to require Ethiopian Jews to submit to ritual immersion or circumcision in order to authenticate their Jewish status. So there weren't rabbis in Israel who were asking Ethiopian Jews to do that. Commends progressive Jewish organizations to integrate. So this is where we see, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef would say they're Jews. But why does the Reform movement have to say this in this statement? Because there were those in Israel who were questioning it. Okay, so let's take a look at why and how they were questioning it. Oh, I didn't. No, I didn't. I opened it without. Sorry, got to start this all over again here. Share screen. Oh, I thought I had it open. Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna have to open something. I opened it before and somehow it got closed. I think this should be open. Okay, let's see where they are. Yeah. Okay. Well, can you see this now? Is it up on your screen? Yeah. The origins of the Ethiopian Jews, also known as Falasha and Beta Yisrael. Okay. All right. Why would a rabbi write a paper like this? All right. Okay. As for the halacha, the government and the rabbinate in Israel, in the direction of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, 74, accepts them as Jews without requiring them to undergo conversion. We know that Rabbi Yosef's ruling is based on the response of Rabbi. Okay, we already read that. But it must be borne in mind that many, if not most, poskim, people who make decisions on Jewish law, authorities of Jewish law, have expressed doubts about the Jewish identity from the viewpoint of halacha. Why is he writing this paper? Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, Fran? No. But presently, lacking supernatural means of retelling the past. Okay, we aren't able to go into back to the past in our time machines. We must live by the rules and guidelines of Torah law in rendering a decision defining who is a Jew. So this is going to be he's saying, we have rules in the Torah and we got to apply them to Ethiopian Jews. Now, Rabbi Avadia Yosef said, we're fine with them. So here's there is as you probably know, there is a tendency within Orthodoxy to be more and more strict, right? That's just a general way Orthodoxy has been moving. Is there a possibility that the Ethiopian Jews were not Jews? Well, this scholar, Rabbi Sender Goldberg, I didn't look him up. Right? Despite the fact that many of the great poskim of the past 50 years have considered the Falasha to be non-Jews until they undergo conversion, they have been considered humanitarian, downtrodden people. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, perhaps the premier posek whose analysis of halakha has concluded that the Falasha are not Jewish, has stated that since the Falasha were persecuted in Ethiopia being considered Jewish, they deserve our assistance. And then here's Rabbi Herzog, which we know Rabbi Avadia Yosef wasn't agreeing with. The first chief rabbi of the state of Israel concluded the Falasha were not Jews. However, he encouraged them to come to Israel, converting them in accordance to halakha and educating them in Judaism. Remember, the Reform movement said, no, they don't need to be converted.
Right.
Rabbi Avadia Yosef said, no, they don't. But now there are some strict leaders in Orthodoxy who are saying they need to be converted. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Comment, Rini.
Yeah, but the Orthodox give everybody a hard time.
That's right.
One of our friends is Martha Himmelfarb. She is a renowned Jewish scholar.
Yes, I know.
Was the head of the Department of Judaic Studies at Princeton. Has Jewish lineage. Her father was a well-known scholar, et cetera, and her
Yes, I know.
daughter went to Israel to be married, and they gave her a very hard time about proving she was Jewish.
Well, nowadays, anyone who tries to make Aliyah, including a member of our congregation who just a couple of weeks ago asked for a letter from me. I had to write a letter, and proving that I knew that this person and that person's mother were Jewish, right? They really wanted approval signed by a rabbi. Yes, it's part of this, shall we say, strictness, right? And notice what he's going to conclude. It is the author's hope that the following study will enlighten the reader as to why numerous decisors in Jewish law have decided that according to halakha, a strict usage of Jewish law, the Falasha cannot be considered Jews. So his purpose is to say they're not Jews. We're going to look at a teshuvah by a conservative rabbi, probably not today, that comes to the opposite conclusion. But here we can see, there's a tendency in the world of strictness to apply things in the strictest possible way, right? So we can't get into the time machine. And to claim we know what happened to the tribe of Dan in the biblical period is simply impossible, right? There's no way we're going to prove that, right? So he talks about how, yes, there was a rabbi that they are. He met Ethiopian Jews, descendants of the tribe of Dan, among the 10 lost tribes. Remember, there were 10 lost tribes. The Assyrians, when they destroyed the temple, the first temple, they brought everybody into the quote Babylonian exile, right? Or I'm sorry, they actually spread Jews around so that they would lose their Judaism. He refers them as Jews. Okay. Now, it's true that the Falasha, the Ethiopian Jews, notice he refers to them as Falasha, which is a name they do not prefer to be called. In their indigenous states, had no remnant of the oral tradition of the Talmudic law, right? Hanukkah, what's that? It happened later. Some Rishonim considered the claims about the tribe of Judah to be fraudulent. Many historians agree. Then he starts claiming that some of the Jewish practices of falashas are common from indigenous Ethiopian tribes. The falasha did not allow polygamy. Okay, well, does that prove something one way or the other, right? The Jewish practice of falasha, they did not know the oral Torah. That's true, absolutely true. Imagine if you were a Jew in ancient times and you had the Bible, but you did not have the rabbinic writings, right? So they do circumcision on the 7th day. Shavuot is celebrated on the 12th of Sivan instead of the 6th of Sivan, which is next week, by the way. It is apparent that the practices were gleaned from a literal reading of an ancient Ethiopian language version of the Torah. Why does he call it the Old Testament? I'm not sure why. I think he's using that term in a pejorative way. The only Bible this falasha accepted. Okay. So he goes on. Mainstream Judaism does not recognize them to be authentic Jews in certain. Okay. They were persecuted. Okay. Practically speaking, if falasha really descended from Jews, they may have lineage defects. Oh my God, there might be mamzerim among them.
Oh,
right?
okay.
If you want to try to prove that they're not Jews,
Okay.
you can certainly speculate, oh, they didn't follow the rules of Gittin, of Jewish divorces, right? Or maybe there was something adulterous relationships. I think that's, a specious argument. The origin is unknown. Okay. Many scholars believe they originate from an African tribe. Okay, that's he's claiming. The majority of contemporary poskim do not accept the response of the Radbaz. In other words, what Avadia Yosef accepts, he says many do not. Who agree with the historians who consider the Jewish traveling reports anecdotal evidence and mythic legends insufficient. That's the question. We have we have legends, we have reports, and we have the views of those rabbis, that Rabbi Avadia Yosef. Even if Rabbi Avadia Yosef believes they are of Jewish extraction, he has divided a complicated legal method. Okay. Ironically, because of Avadia Yosef's ruling and replying on Radbaz to accept the falasha as being Jewish extraction, traditional Sephardic Jews will not marry falasha, even those who have undergone conversion and are religiously observant. This I'm not that familiar with, but I'm not so sure that's still true. In conclusion, this article is written as the multi-review of the, okay. We cite the rabbinic authorities, do not consider, so there are some rabbinic authorities. Historical research. We're never going to know for sure where they came from. Okay. These citations represent subsidiary evidence to the question of Jewish law. Ultimately, the matter of Jewish identity can be only decided by a consensus of classical Torah and Talmudic scholars who base their judgment upon the traditions they have sustained the Jewish people throughout the ages, i.e., very right-wing Orthodox scholars, and those are the only ones we accept. And therefore, since there are some who can say legitimately, we really don't know for sure. And that's probably true. We really don't know for sure. Are they descendants of the tribe of Dan? Maybe, maybe not. But here they are, and what should we do? Avadia Yosef says, they say they're Jews. We have some evidence they're Jews. What this scholar is saying, let's take a look at the evidence. It's not so conclusive. So let's call them non-Jews. Right? I think we have a difference of attitude and expansive or restrictive views of who should be allowed into the Jewish people. Okay. Comments on that? I see was there something in the chat? Oh, someone had to leave. Okay. Next time we will see that. So what does the conservative movement do about this? Question, Sheila. Are the Falashas usually considered to be Jewish? And in 1986, same time, right? Remember, many of them came over in the 1980s. It's all this period in the mid 1980s about Jewish status, and this was a unanimous vote of 13-0. The question, and the question that he has, well, we'll just take a look at this and finish it next time in 2 weeks. In 1985, Rabbi David Bleich, very well known, respected, very traditional Orthodox rabbi, published a rather mean-spirited response in which he argues the Falasha not to be considered Jewish and must undergo conversion. As we shall see, Rabbi Bleich's response is predicted on a misunderstanding of the importance of the early sources, an incomplete understanding of the historical origins of the Falasha, and a fundamentalist understanding of the origin of Black people. You mean racism may have played something into this? This mean-spirited response, in my opinion, because much intellectual energy has been spent trying to discredit the Jewishness of these people without any attempt whatsoever to put them and their practice of Judaism into a historical. So he's going to say, we're going to have a historical perspective, but they fit in. And we cannot forget that there are other factors that are trying to make people see them as outside the world, the Jewish world. Okay, our time's about up. We'll take a look at this next time. Any other comments, questions before we, yes, Carol.
Are they willing to undergo a process of conversion?
For the most part, no, because what's their response? Hey, we're Jews. What do you mean I got to convert? Right? I mean, we see this, and I said, hey, Avadia Yosef said, would you, if we either we're Jews or we're not Jews. If we're Jews, we don't have to convert, right? Okay, Charlie.
Just a minor problem to me. To write a scholarly work and say something is mean-spirited is a very prejudicial comment to start off with. I mean, you're writing a serious paper and you're saying the other guy's mean-spirited. I mean, that's unfair criticism, I don't.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, and let me see if I can find that paper. Okay, I have not read David Bleich's on them, but I may be able to find it.
But the characterization is my point, not so much. Well, maybe it is mean-spirited, but is that the right approach to really examine something?
Okay.
To castigate it before you really examine it.
Well, let's say I hear what you're saying, and it's a point to be made only by the two issues. One, reading what that Rabbi Bleich said, and then we can say whether or not if you disagree with him. It's one thing to disagree. Oh, I think he's wrong, right? As opposed to challenging the tone. And I'll be honest, you're right. I don't know the tone. And is that an accurate reflection of the tone? And even if it is an accurate reflection of the tone, is it appropriate to say that?
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. All right, any other comments or questions before we leave? All right, well, enjoy Shavuot. Remember the synagogue's having a big program Sunday evening, right, Charlie? Are you a part of that?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely, yes.
And
6:30.
Fran,
The marching in the Torahs.
marching the Torahs. I'm not sure. You're gonna march around the parking lot and sort of show our unity of the merger.
I think so. I think that's the way it's going to be, because with the climate of anti-Semitism and everything, and we would have liked to have been able to march around a few blocks, a few streets, but we don't want to take a chance, so we're going to be in the parking lot.
Okay, 6:30 Sunday night. Enjoy Chag Sameach, enjoy Shavuot, and if not, if I don't see you then, I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Everyone have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.